A detective at my door showed me a death certificate and said, "Your husband died 6 years ago. Who's the man in your house?" I stood in my doorway holding a dish towel, still damp from washing breakfast plates, and stared at the laminated document the detective was holding up to my face. The death certificate had my husband's name printed clearly. Michael David Brennan. Date of death, October 14th, 6 years ago. Cause, vehicular accident. My hands started shaking because Michael was upstairs right now taking a shower, very much alive, getting ready for his shift at the hospital where he worked as a surgical nurse. "There's been a mistake," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "My husband is upstairs. We've been married for 5 years. I have a marriage license, photos, bank accounts, everything." The detective was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her badge identified her as Detective Karen Albright from the Fraud Division. She didn't put the death certificate away. Instead, she pulled out another document. A driver's license photo of a man who looked exactly like my husband. Same blue eyes, same angular jaw, same small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident. "This is Michael David Brennan," Detective Albright said. "Born in Milwaukee, worked as an EMT, died in a car crash on Interstate 94 outside Madison. His body was identified by dental records and fingerprints. He's buried in Forest Hill Cemetery. I visited his grave yesterday." My knees felt weak and I grabbed the doorframe for support. "I don't understand what you're telling me." Detective Albright's expression was somewhere between sympathy and professional detachment. "Mrs. Brennan, the man you believe is your husband has been using a dead man's identity for at least 6 years. We need to know who he really is, where he came from, and why he stole Michael Brennan's life." I heard the shower turn off upstairs and panic flooded through me. The man I'd slept next to every night for 5 years, the man I'd married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, the man whose child I was carrying, was apparently not who he claimed to be. "You can't just come here and tell me my husband is dead," I said, my voice rising. "I've seen his driver's license, his social security card, his birth certificate. We filed joint tax returns. How could he fake all of that?" Detective Albright pulled out her phone and showed me a crime scene photo that made my stomach turn. It was a mangled car wrapped around a tree, and inside was a body so badly damaged I couldn't make out features. This was the real Michael Brennan 6 years ago. The man upstairs stole his identity sometime after this accident, probably by obtaining copies of his documents before the death was fully processed through all government systems. It's more common than people think. Identity theft of deceased individuals can go undetected for years if the thief is careful. I thought about all the small things that had seemed slightly odd over the years but that I'd dismissed. Michael never talked about his childhood in detail. He had no contact with family, claiming they'd died when he was young. He avoided having his photo taken. He paid for everything in cash when possible. He'd been reluctant to apply for a passport when I'd suggested a trip to Mexico. I'd attributed all of this to him being private and introverted, but now those quirks took on sinister meaning. "I need to speak with him," Detective Albright said, and her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. "I have a warrant for questioning, and if he doesn't cooperate, I have authorization to arrest him for identity fraud, social security fraud, and potentially other charges we're still investigating." The bathroom door upstairs opened and I heard Michael's footsteps in the hallway. My mind raced through options. Should I warn him? Should I run upstairs and demand the truth before police got involved? Should I protect the man I loved even if everything about him was a lie? Detective Albright must have seen something in my face because she said quietly, "Mrs. Brennan, I know this is devastating, but if you interfere with this investigation or help him flee, you could be charged as an accessory. I need you to step aside and let me do my job." Michael appeared at the top of the stairs wearing jeans and a t-shirt, his hair still wet. He saw me standing at the door and smiled, then noticed the detective and his expression froze. For just a second, I saw something flash across his face. Recognition, fear, calculation. Then it was gone, replaced by polite confusion. "Can I help you?" he asked, coming down the stairs. His voice was calm, but I could see tension in his shoulders. Detective Albright held up her badge. "I'm Detective Karen Albright. I need to ask you some questions about your identity, specifically about how you came to possess documents belonging to Michael David Brennan, who died 6 years ago in Wisconsin." Michael's face went pale and he grabbed the stair railing. "I don't know what you're talking about. I am Michael Brennan. There must be some mistake." Detective Albright pulled out a small fingerprint scanner from her jacket pocket. "Then you won't mind providing your fingerprints so we can confirm your identity matches the Michael Brennan whose birth certificate you've been using." Michael looked at me and something in his eyes made my heart break. It wasn't confusion or indignation. It was apology and resignation. He knew he'd been caught. "Can I speak to my wife privately for a moment?" Michael asked, his voice cracking slightly. Detective Albright shook her head. "No, sir. You need to come with me to the station for questioning. You can cooperate voluntarily, or I can place you under arrest right now. Your choice." Michael took a step down the stairs and Detective Albright's hand moved to her holster. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He stopped and raised his hand slightly. "I'll cooperate. Just please, let me explain to Claire what's happening. She deserves that much." The way he said my name, with such desperate affection, made tears spring to my eyes. This man, whoever he was, had loved me. I'd felt it in every touch, every late-night conversation, every time he'd held me. That couldn't all be fake, could it? Detective Albright considered for a moment, then nodded. 2 minutes. I'll be right here. She stepped back slightly but kept her hand near her weapon. Michael came down the remaining stairs and stopped a few feet from me. Up close, I could see his hands were trembling. Claire, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant to fall in love with you. When we met, I was just trying to survive, trying to build a new life. But then you became the most important thing in my world, and I couldn't tell you the truth because I was terrified of losing you. Who are you? I whispered. What's your real name? He closed his eyes and took a shaky breath. My real name is Daniel Kozlov. I'm from New Jersey originally. 6 years ago, I witnessed something I shouldn't have seen and people wanted me dead. The police couldn't protect me, witness protection wouldn't take me because the case wasn't federal. So I ran. I stole a dead man's identity because I needed to disappear completely. Everything I told you about my life was a lie, except for one thing. I love you. That was always real. The words should have comforted me, but they just made everything worse. 5 years of my life had been built on lies. The man I'd married didn't legally exist. Our marriage probably wasn't even valid, and I was 3 months pregnant with a child whose father was a criminal fugitive. What did you witness? I asked. Daniel's eyes opened and they were full of pain. A murder. I saw a police officer shoot an unarmed man during a traffic stop, then plant a weapon on the body. I recorded it on my phone. When I tried to report it, I started getting death threats. My apartment was broken into. Someone tried to run me off the road. I went to the FBI, but the case got stalled in bureaucracy. The cop who did the shooting had connections, powerful friends. I realized no one was going to protect me, so I had to disappear. Detective Albright interrupted. Time's up. Mr. Kozlov, or whatever your name is, you need to come with me now. Daniel looked at me one more time. I'm sorry, Claire. I'm sorry for everything. But I need you to know that the man you fell in love with, that was the real me. The only real thing in my fake life was you. 2 uniformed officers had arrived and they moved forward to escort Daniel out. He didn't resist as they put him in handcuffs. I stood frozen in my doorway, watching the man I thought I knew being led to a police car. Neighbors were peering out windows and standing on lawns, witnessing my humiliation. Detective Albright stayed behind after the patrol car drove away. She handed me a business card. I know this is overwhelming, Mrs. Brennan. Or I guess you're not legally Mrs. Brennan since the marriage was based on fraudulent identity. We'll need you to come to the station later today to give a formal statement about your relationship with Daniel Kozlov, what you knew and when you knew it. The implication was clear. They thought I might have been complicit. I didn't know, I said, my voice hollow. I swear I had no idea he wasn't who he claimed to be. Detective Albright's expression was unreadable. That's what we need to determine. In the meantime, I'd advise you not to touch any of his personal belongings. We'll be executing a search warrant on your house this afternoon. You might want to stay with family or friends while we process the scene. Process the scene. Like my home was a crime scene. Like my marriage was evidence of a crime. After Detective Albright left, I sat on my couch in shock, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My phone was buzzing with calls from my mother, my sister, my best friend. News traveled fast in our neighborhood. I ignored them all and instead started looking through our lives for signs I'd missed. I went to our bedroom and opened Daniel's closet. His hospital scrubs hung neatly, his work badge clipped to the pocket. But wait, if he was using a stolen identity, how had he gotten a job at the hospital? They did background checks, verified credentials. I pulled out his badge and studied it. Michael Brennan, RN, Mercy General Hospital. I called the hospital's HR department and asked to verify employment. The woman who answered confirmed that Michael Brennan had worked there for 4 years, had excellent performance reviews, had passed all background checks and licensing verifications. How is that possible? I asked. How could someone with a fake identity pass your screening? The HR representative's voice became guarded. I'm not at liberty to discuss personnel matters. If you have concerns about an employee, you'll need to file a formal complaint. I hung up and kept searching. In the back of Daniel's nightstand drawer, buried under old receipts and spare change, I found a small USB drive. My hands shook as I plugged it into my laptop. The drive contained a single video file dated 6 years ago. I clicked play and watched footage shot from a car's perspective. The video showed a traffic stop, a nervous young black man being pulled over, a police officer approaching, the situation escalating quickly. Then the officer drew his weapon and fired 3 times. The young man fell. The officer bent down and placed a gun near the body. The video was crystal clear, shot in daylight, showing the officer's face and badge number. The murder Daniel had witnessed wasn't just a murder. It was an execution by someone sworn to protect people. The officer in the video was younger, but I recognized him from local news coverage. Captain Thomas Vickers, now a decorated member of the police department, frequently featured in community outreach programs. I sat staring at the screen, understanding why Daniel had run. If he'd come forward with this video, if he'd tried to expose Captain Vickers, he would have been killed. The thin blue line protected its own, and a random witness with damning evidence would have been disposed of quietly. But Daniel keeping the video meant he'd been living with a target on his back for 6 years. No wonder he'd stolen a dead man's identity. No wonder he'd avoided anything that might draw attention. He'd been surviving the only way he knew how. My phone rang, and it was Detective Albright. "Mrs. Brennan, we need you at the station now. Daniel Kozlov has requested to speak with you before his formal arraignment. You're not obligated to see him, but he's insisting he needs to tell you something important." I looked at the USB drive in my hand. The video paused on Captain Vickers' face. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. But Detective, I found something you need to see. Something that explains why Daniel was hiding." There was a long pause. "What kind of something?" I ejected the USB drive and put it in my pocket. "Evidence of a murder. Evidence that will show Daniel wasn't just running from his past. He was running for his life." Detective Albright told me to bring the drive directly to the station and not to show it to anyone else. Her voice had a new edge of urgency that made me wonder if she understood the implications. A man with evidence against a police captain wouldn't just be arrested for identity fraud. He'd be vulnerable to whoever wanted that video destroyed. I drove to the police station with my heart pounding, clutching the USB drive and thinking about the man I loved who'd built his entire existence on lies to protect himself. The station was a concrete building downtown that smelled like industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Detective Albright met me in the lobby and escorted me to an interview room. "Before you see Daniel, I need to look at what you found," she said. I handed her the USB drive and watched her expression change as she viewed the video on her laptop. Her face went from professional interest to shock to something harder and more determined. She watched it twice, then closed the laptop and looked at me. "Do you understand what you just gave me? This is evidence in an open case. 6 years ago, a man named Anthony Reeves was shot during a traffic stop. The officer claimed self-defense. The department cleared him. Anthony's family has been fighting for justice ever since, but without evidence, they had nothing. This video changes everything." I felt cold spreading through my chest. Daniel has been carrying this for 6 years, living under a fake identity because he knew what would happen if anyone found out he had it. And now you've arrested him and his real identity is in your system. If Captain Vickers finds out Daniel is here, if he finds out that video still exists... Detective Albright stood up quickly. "Wait here, don't move." She left the room and I heard urgent conversations in the hallway, footsteps running, radio chatter. Something was happening. 10 minutes later, Detective Albright returned with an older man in a suit who introduced himself as Captain Lawrence Shepard, her superior. He looked grim. "Miss Clark, we have a situation. About 15 minutes ago, Captain Vickers accessed the booking system and ran a search on Daniel Kozlov's name. He now knows Daniel is in custody here. He's claiming he needs to interview Daniel about an unrelated case, but given what we just learned from that video, we believe he's trying to get access to your husband to silence him permanently." The room felt like it was tilting. "You're saying a police captain is going to kill Daniel while he's in your custody?" Captain Shepard's jaw tightened. "We're not going to let that happen. We've moved Daniel to a secure location and activated protocols for protecting a witness in danger from law enforcement. But Miss Clark, this situation is extremely dangerous. If Vickers realizes we're onto him, if he knows the video exists, he may come after you too. You were Daniel's partner. He would assume Daniel might have shared the evidence with you." I thought about my empty house, the search warrant that would bring officers through my belongings this afternoon, officers who might include people loyal to Captain Vickers. "What do I do? Where do I go?" Detective Albright exchanged a look with Captain Shepard. "We're placing you in protective custody, just temporarily, until we can secure the evidence and build a case against Vickers. You'll stay in a safe house with officers we trust. I know this is a lot to process, but your life may depend on it." Everything was spiraling out of control. 24 hours ago, I'd been a normal woman with a normal marriage. Now I was in protective custody because my husband was a fugitive with evidence that could bring down a dirty cop. "I need to see Daniel," I said. "You told me he wanted to talk to me. I need to see him now." Captain Shepard shook his head. "That's not advisable given the security situation." I stood up and my voice came out stronger than I felt. "I don't care about advisable. The man I married, whether his name is Michael or Daniel, is in danger because he tried to do the right thing 6 years ago. I'm 3 months pregnant with his child. I deserve to hear whatever he needs to tell me." Captain Shepard studied me for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. 15 minutes, supervised. And then you're going to the safe house whether you like it or not." They took me to a different part of the building, through security doors and down corridors I didn't recognize. Daniel was in a small room with no windows, sitting at a table with his hands cuffed. He looked exhausted and scared. When I walked in, relief flooded his face. "Claire, thank God, I was terrified they wouldn't let me see you." I sat down across from him while Detective Albright stood by the door. "I found the video. I gave it to them. They know about Captain Vickers." Daniel closed his eyes and let out a shaky breath. "I should have destroyed it years ago. I kept it because I thought someday I'd be brave enough to come forward. But every year that passed, it got harder. I built a life, I met you, and the thought of losing everything became more terrifying than the thought of that video existing." His voice cracked. I'm sorry, Claire. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. I'm sorry I lied about who I was. I'm sorry our marriage isn't real. The words hit me harder than I expected. Our marriage isn't real? What does that mean legally? Detective Albright answered from the doorway. A marriage based on fraudulent identity is voidable. It can be annulled as if it never existed. Any property or assets would need to be untangled. It's complicated. I looked at Daniel and saw my own pain reflected in his eyes. So everything we built together just disappears? 5 years of my life just gets erased? Daniel reached across the table and I noticed his hands were shaking. The marriage certificate might not be real, but what we had was real. Every moment we spent together, every conversation, every time I held you. That was Daniel being honest for the first time in 6 years. You made me want to be a better person, Claire. You made me want to deserve the life I'd stolen. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at him for lying, for using me, for destroying my life. But looking at his face, seeing his genuine remorse and fear, I just felt hollow. What happens now? They're putting me in a safe house because Captain Vickers might come after me. You're going to be charged with identity fraud, and our baby is going to be born while their father is in prison. Daniel's face crumpled. You're pregnant? I hadn't told him yet. I'd been planning to surprise him with the news this weekend. 3 months. I found out 2 weeks ago. He looked like I'd punched him. Tears ran down his face and he couldn't wipe them away because of the cuffs. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry our child is going to grow up with a criminal for a father. I'm sorry I can't be there for you. Detective Albright stepped forward. Time's up. We need to move both of you to secure locations. As I stood to leave, Daniel said desperately, Claire, wait. There's something else you need to know. The video on that USB drive isn't the only evidence I have. I made copies. I sent one to a lawyer in Philadelphia with instructions to release it to media if anything happened to me. Captain Vickers doesn't know about that backup. If something happens to me while I'm in custody, that video goes public automatically. Captain Shepard, who'd been listening from outside, came into the room. Where exactly is this backup copy? Who has it? Daniel gave him the name and address of a law firm in Philadelphia. It's in a sealed envelope with time-sensitive release instructions. If I don't check in every 6 months with a specific code, they open it and send the contents to every major news outlet in the country. Captain Shepard looked impressed despite the situation. You've been living with a dead man switch for 6 years. That's either very clever or very paranoid. Daniel's expression hardened. You try witnessing a murder by a cop and then tell me how paranoid is too paranoid. They separated us after that. I was taken to a safe house in a suburb 40 minutes away. It was a nondescript ranch house with bars on the windows and 2 plainclothes officers assigned to guard me. Detective Albright stayed with me to explain what would happen next. We're opening a formal investigation into Captain Vickers for the murder of Anthony Reeves. We're also looking into whether Vickers has been searching for Daniel all these years, whether he knew about the identity theft and was tracking him. There are questions about how Vickers might have accessed sealed witness information and whether others in the department helped him. I sat on the unfamiliar couch in the unfamiliar house and tried to process everything. What happens to Daniel? Will he go to prison for the identity fraud? Detective Albright hesitated. That depends on several factors. His cooperation with the Vickers investigation will count in his favor. The fact that he was fleeing a legitimate threat rather than committing fraud for financial gain matters. But he did break multiple laws. He used a stolen identity, obtained employment under false pretenses, committed Social Security fraud. Even with mitigating circumstances, there will be consequences. I thought about my baby growing inside me, about trying to explain to a child someday why their father was in prison. He was trying to survive. The system failed him. He went to the FBI and got bureaucratic delays. He got death threats and no protection. What was he supposed to do? Detective Albright's expression was sympathetic but firm. I understand your perspective, but we can't just ignore identity theft because the person had good reasons. That sets a dangerous precedent. Daniel will have his day in court and a judge will consider all the circumstances. For now, he's being moved to a federal facility where he'll be protected while he cooperates with the investigation into Captain Vickers. The next week was surreal. I stayed in the safe house watching news coverage of Captain Vickers being placed on administrative leave pending investigation into the Anthony Reeves shooting. Anthony's family appeared on television expressing cautious hope that justice might finally be served. Civil rights organizations rallied around the case. The police union issued statements defending Vickers and questioning the credibility of evidence that had suddenly appeared after 6 years. The video went viral after being leaked to media, though prosecutors tried to keep it sealed. I watched it on my phone a dozen times, seeing the casual brutality of Captain Vickers executing a young man for the crime of being pulled over while black. I understood why Daniel had kept this evidence, why he'd been willing to steal an identity and live underground rather than let this murder go unpunished. Daniel was formally charged with identity theft, Social Security fraud, and falsifying employment records. His arraignment was held privately for security reasons. I wasn't allowed to attend, but Detective Albright kept me updated. Daniel had pleaded guilty to all charges and was cooperating fully with prosecutors building the case against Vickers. His lawyer was arguing for leniency based on witness protection circumstances. 3 weeks after my world imploded, I was finally allowed to return home. The house felt different. contaminated by the knowledge that everything I'd believed was false. I walked through rooms remembering moments with Daniel, not knowing whether to cherish or hate those memories. My mother came to stay with me because I couldn't bear to be alone. She tried to be supportive but kept saying things about how I was lucky to have found out the truth before it was too late. Except it already was too late. I was pregnant. I'd built a life with this man. Finding out the truth hadn't protected me from heartbreak. One evening, I was sorting through papers in Daniel's desk when I found a letter addressed to me, sealed in an envelope with my name written in his familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was dated 3 months ago, around the time he'd told me he was thinking about trying to find work overseas, something I dismissed as restless talk. "Claire," the letter began, "if you're reading this, something has gone wrong and my past has caught up to me. I want to explain everything before someone else tells you a version of my story that makes me sound worse than I am. My real name is Daniel Kozlov. I grew up in Newark. I was studying to be a paramedic when I witnessed a murder that changed my life. I've been running for 6 years, and meeting you was the first time running felt wrong. You made me want to stop hiding, but I didn't know how to tell you the truth without losing you. I know what I did was wrong. I stole a dead man's identity. I lied to you about everything. But I need you to understand that the man you fell in love with, that was really me. The only honest thing in my fake life was my love for you." The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing his childhood, his family who died in a house fire when he was 19, his struggle to build a life for himself. He wrote about the night he witnessed Captain Vickers murder Anthony Reeves, about the death threats that followed, about his decision to disappear. He explained how he'd chosen Michael Brennan's identity because they looked similar, and Michael had no living family to notice the theft. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," the letter concluded, "but I hope someday you can understand why I did what I did. I was terrified and alone, and the people who were supposed to protect me had failed. I made terrible choices. I lied to the person I love most in the world. But I want you to know that if I could go back and do things differently, the only thing I'd change is telling you the truth from the beginning. I wouldn't change falling in love with you. That was the best decision I ever made, even if I made it under a lie." I cried reading that letter, sitting alone in the house we'd shared, carrying a baby whose father was in federal custody. My mother found me like that and held me while I sobbed. "He's a good person who made bad choices because the system failed him," I said through my tears. "And now he's going to prison and our baby will grow up without a father." My mother stroked my hair. "Sometimes life is just unfair, honey. Sometimes there are no good options." 6 months after Daniel's arrest, I testified as a character witness at his sentencing hearing. I was visibly pregnant now, my belly prominent under the black dress I'd chosen. I told the judge about the man I'd known, about his kindness and his dedication to his work at the hospital, about how he'd volunteered at a homeless shelter on weekends and had helped elderly neighbors with yard work. I explained that he'd deceived me, but that the fundamental person beneath the lie had been good. The prosecutor pushed back, arguing that Daniel had committed serious crimes regardless of his motives, that allowing witness protection concerns to excuse identity theft would set a dangerous precedent. Daniel's lawyer countered that the system's failure to protect Daniel had forced him to protect himself, that he'd cooperated fully once caught, and that his testimony would be crucial to convicting Captain Vickers of murder. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s who listened to everything before delivering her ruling. "Mr. Kozlov, you committed serious crimes. Identity theft, fraud, falsifying documents. These aren't minor offenses. However, the circumstances that led to your actions are significant. You witnessed a murder and the system failed to protect you. You made the choice to disappear rather than risk your life. While I can't condone your methods, I understand your desperation." She sentenced Daniel to 3 years in federal prison, with credit for time served and possibility of parole after 18 months. It was less than the maximum, but more than I'd hoped. Daniel would miss our baby's birth. He'd miss the first year of our child's life. The judge also ordered restitution to be paid to the hospital where he'd worked under false credentials and to the Social Security Administration for fraud. Daniel would carry this conviction for the rest of his life, affecting his ability to work, to rent housing, to build any kind of normal future. After sentencing, I was allowed a brief visit with Daniel before he was transferred to the federal facility where he'd serve his time. We sat across from each other in a small room with a guard watching from the doorway. "I'm sorry," Daniel said for what felt like the 1,000th time. "I'm sorry I won't be there when you give birth. I'm sorry I can't be the father our baby deserves." I reached across the table and took his hands, not caring that we weren't supposed to have physical contact. "You can still be a father, from prison, through letters and visits. And when you get out, you can be part of our child's life if you want to be. If I let you. I haven't decided yet." Daniel looked at me with desperate hope. "I want that more than anything. I want the chance to be honest with you, to build something real without lies. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway." I pulled my hands back. "I need time. I need to figure out who you really are when you're not hiding. I need to decide if I can trust you again. Our baby will know their father, but whether we can ever be a family again, I don't know." The guard said our time was up. I stood to leave and Daniel called out, "Claire, wait. Whatever you decide, I want you to know something. The name Michael might have been fake, but when I married you, when I said those vows, I meant every word. In my heart, you're my wife. You always will be." I left without responding because I didn't know what to say. Was I his wife? The marriage certificate was void. The man I'd married didn't legally exist, but the feelings were real. The love was real. How do you categorize a relationship built on lies when the emotions were genuine? 3 months later, I gave birth to a daughter I named Sophie. She had Daniel's blue eyes and my dark hair. I sent him photos and he called from prison crying with joy and regret. He wanted to know everything: her weight, her length, whether she slept well, what her first days were like. I told him the details because he deserved to know his daughter even if he couldn't hold her. Meanwhile, Captain Vickers' case proceeded to trial. I was called to testify about Daniel's character and about the circumstances surrounding the video evidence. The defense tried to discredit Daniel as a criminal and a liar, but the video spoke for itself. Anthony Reeves had been unarmed, compliant, and non-threatening. Captain Vickers had executed him and planted a weapon. The jury convicted Vickers of second-degree murder after 3 days of deliberation. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Anthony's family finally got justice, 6 years after their son's death. At the sentencing, Anthony's mother gave a victim impact statement that made everyone in the courtroom cry. She thanked Daniel for preserving the evidence, for having the courage to keep that video even when it cost him everything. She said Daniel was a hero who'd sacrificed his own freedom, so her son's murderer would face consequences. I thought about that word, hero. Daniel had done something brave by keeping that video, but he'd also committed serious crimes to protect himself. He was both hero and criminal, victim and perpetrator. People didn't fit into simple categories. When Sophie was 6 months old, I brought her to visit Daniel in prison for the first time. We sat in a visiting room with other families, surrounded by the noise of conversations and children playing in the designated area. Daniel held Sophie carefully, tears running down his face as she grabbed his finger. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's absolutely perfect." Sophie gurgled at him, and he laughed through his tears. I watched them together and felt my anger softening. This man had lied to me about his identity, but he hadn't lied about his heart. He'd been terrified and desperate, and he'd made terrible choices, but he'd also tried to do the right thing about the murder he'd witnessed. "I've been thinking," I said carefully, "about what happens when you get out, about whether we can try again." Daniel looked up at me with cautious hope. "I'll understand if you can't forgive me. I'll understand if you want me to just be Sophie's father and nothing more to you." I took a deep breath. "I'm not promising anything, but I think we should try. Not as Michael and Claire, but as Daniel and Claire. Starting fresh with honesty. You'll have to earn my trust back. You'll have to prove you can be honest even when the truth is hard. But I think our daughter deserves parents who try." Daniel's face crumpled and he nodded, unable to speak. Sophie reached for his face and he kissed her tiny hand. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can be the man you deserve," he finally said. "I promise." 14 months after his sentencing, Daniel was granted parole. He'd served nearly 2 years total, including time in custody before sentencing. He walked out of federal prison to find me and Sophie waiting in the parking lot. Sophie was almost 2 now, walking and talking, and she didn't remember her father. Daniel knelt down to her level and said gently, "Hi, Sophie. I'm your daddy. I've been away, but I'm here now." Sophie hid behind my legs, shy with this stranger. Daniel looked devastated, but I'd warned him this might happen. "It'll take time," I said. "She'll learn to know you." We drove to a small apartment I'd rented for Daniel, helping him move in with the few belongings he had. He couldn't stay with us yet. That felt too fast, too presumptuous. We needed to rebuild slowly, learning to trust each other again from the foundation up. Over the next year, Daniel worked to reintegrate into society. His felony conviction made employment difficult, but a nonprofit organization that helped former inmates find work placed him in a position at a community health clinic. He couldn't be a nurse anymore with his criminal record, but he could work in administration, scheduling appointments, and managing patient records. He attended therapy to process his trauma from years of hiding and from prison. He showed up for Sophie, taking her to the park every Saturday, reading her bedtime stories when I'd let him, slowly building a relationship with his daughter. He was patient with me, giving me space when I needed it and being present when I let him. He answered every question I had about his real past, telling me about his childhood in Newark, his parents who died, his struggle to survive after their death. He shared the parts of himself he'd hidden behind Michael Brennan's identity. I learned that Daniel loved old movies and had always wanted to travel to Ireland. He played guitar but had sold his instrument years ago when he needed money. He was afraid of heights but pretended he wasn't. These small details filled in the person I'd married without knowing. 2 years after Daniel's release, we were legally married in a small courthouse ceremony with Sophie as our flower girl. This time, Daniel used his real name. This time, the marriage was legally valid. This time, we built our relationship on truth instead of lies. "Do you, Daniel Kozlov, take Claire to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the judge asked. Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I do. And this time, I'm promising it as myself, with nothing hidden." We built a life together slowly, carefully, with honesty as our foundation. Sophie grew up knowing her father's full story, age appropriately told. We never hid the truth from her about why her daddy had been away when she was little. Daniel started a support group for people who'd witnessed crimes and felt abandoned by the system, using his story to advocate for better witness protection. He spoke at community forums about the impossible choices people make when survival and justice conflict. 5 years after that detective showed up at my door, I finally felt like I knew my husband. The real him, not the persona he'd created. Daniel Kozlov was flawed and imperfect, capable of both heroism and crime, but he was also kind and devoted and brave in his own complicated way. We'd both paid a price for his lies, but we'd also built something genuine from the wreckage. On our 3rd anniversary, Daniel gave me a gift. The original marriage certificate from our first wedding, the one that wasn't legally valid. "I know this doesn't count," he said, "but I want you to have it anyway, because even though Michael Brennan wasn't real, what I felt when I married you was the truest thing I'd ever experienced." I looked at the certificate with Michael's false name and thought about everything that had happened since that detective showed me a death certificate. My life had been destroyed and rebuilt. I'd lost the man I thought I loved and found someone more complicated underneath. I'd learned that people could be both victims and perpetrators, that love could survive lies if the foundation beneath was genuine. "I'm glad she came to the door that day," I said finally. Daniel looked surprised. "Really?" I nodded. "Because living with your truth, even the hard parts, is better than living with a beautiful lie. I'd rather have Daniel Kozlov, ex-convict with a complicated past, than Michael Brennan, perfect man who never really existed." He pulled me close and kissed my forehead. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life deserving that." And as Sophie called for us from the other room and we went to her together, I believed him. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.